Hey there, I'm Jackie Ferris. This week on the 302, we are playing a cool and colorful game of telephone at the Biggs Museum of American Art. Get ready, the 302 is about to blow your mind. Welcome to the Biggs Museum. We're talking about a fantastic and unique exhibit called Circle of Truth. And I'm joined by Laura Fravel to kind of tell us all about it. Laura, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you for coming.
We always love coming for a visit, but this time the exhibit is a lot different than what we're used to seeing. So talk to me a little bit about this concept of telephone related to the images.
Well, the exhibit itself, Circle of Truth, 49 Paintings Ending with Ed Ruscha, is basically a huge game of telephone, also known as the rumor game. Some people grew up with different names. When you're a kid, basically you whisper a secret in somebody's ear, they pass it on to the next person, pass it on to the next person. By the time you get to the end, it's changed so much it's unrecognizable, and then everybody breaks out laughing. And this is the artistic version of that, but with the idea of truth. So it's curated by two artists, Shane Gufog and Laura Hipke, both who started at Pharmaca in LA. And Shane painted the first painting of what is truth, and it is, to him, fairly straightforward. It is based on the golden ratio. He has these very clear proportions that underline a lot of natural forms, painted in a lot of primary colors, so going back to basics. And then he didn't want it to be too obvious to the next artist, so he painted this veil over it to kind of obscure it a little bit. And the next artist took one look at it, did not notice any of the underlying colors he had intended, but saw the veil and thought the stripes were interesting. And so they painted their own work that basically looks like this grid of stripes over winter, that they saw his primary colors as summer colors. They wanted to do something complementary. They went winter. The next artist did not even see the winter in it, just saw the stripes again, and did what basically looks like a cat in a rainstorm. So you see this face kind of coming through the stripes that are coming down, but it's getting a little obscured. The next artist did not see the cat, but saw what looks like a bone structure underlying things and painted a skull. So every artist tries to respond to the one before it and try to figure out what those associations are, what the artist intended, but without ever really getting to the meaning.
So the first four images in the show really kind of like the meaning that it's like a shared meaning. They don't, you can see that they don't really break off as of yet, but when you get through the show, and we're going to go and we're going to check out the other rooms in our later segments, but so, I mean, the differences in some of them are just amazing. I mean, were you surprised when you started going through them?
Huge leaps. And one of the things that to me makes the show interesting is that each artist, after they sent their work on to the next one in the series, wrote a short essay of what their thought process was. And they had the option to do this or not. I think there are only two in the show who chose not to say what they were thinking. But so many people misunderstood what was given to them. What the artist before thought was so clear that they were kind of passing along these clues to the next artist, and the next artist completely missed it and got a whole other range of associations. And I think that's the heart of the show, is it's around this idea of what is truthful, and that is so different to each person. Is this based on your lived experience? Is there underlying truth in scientific structures? There's some things in the show that look like outer space, molecules, things under a microscope. Is truth more kind of a grid underlining things, straight lines, primary colors? And that is something that actually became political as the show went on too. This was done by the 49 artists over a period of 9 years, from 2007 to 2016. And towards the end, those last artists, it was hard to live in that time thinking about truth and not think about politics, about the upcoming election. And now that we have the show here again, even though it's not an overtly political show, I feel like truth is again in the news of what is truthful and how can we better communicate to each other? How does perception influence how you experience the world?
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, it also speaks to an artist's ability to communicate effectively in order for this truth to kind of filter through, but also the second artist's ability to interpret what's being said, like you were talking about that veil. But let's talk about the process. Now, all of these paintings, all of these creations are on the same size canvas, and an artist would get an image. Now, would they get the actual image, or would they get a copy of it, and then they would send their image to the next artist, right?
They actually got the previous artist's painting in their studio. And early on, they had a time period. They were on a ticking clock of, I think, within 2 weeks, they had to paint their response and send it on. And Laura and Shane, the two curators, intentionally came up with a mix of artists who were representational and abstract, so that everybody would have to fight a little with what they were looking at. And some people painted things very similar to what they were known for. Some people painted something that they'd never done before, and this encouraged them to go in new directions. But forcing people to think about their own work too, and how they communicate through that as well. We have in the show the crate the two curators used to travel the works. It holds 2 paintings, so the painting before you in the series, and then a blank canvas for you. And then the 2 curators would come pick it up, whisk it away, hide the painting you were looking at, and then the next artist would get your painting and a blank canvas and would have to start over.
Now, I know that this is, you said it was done from 2009 to 2016?
2007 to 2016.
Okay. So is this the first time that this has been on exhibit, or has this traveled?
It's traveled a little bit, and it's actually having an exciting moment now. The 2 curators are now doing a European edition of the show, have a whole different roster of artists who are going through this process right now of what truth means to them. And then I think after us, those 2 shows may travel together.
That would be really awesome. And now I'm curious if the themes are going to be the same, start out with a similar circle of truth kind of image, that number 1, and then, see what happens, because, I mean, I think artists on the different continents, they all have their own interpretations of art and space and things.
They do, and reading the artist responses in this show, there are some people who clearly meditated on what truth means and paid close attention to this prompt from the 2 curators, and others who more gave weight to the painting that came before them. They saw it as a dialogue. Instead of thinking of what is their truth, they wanted to make sure they brought along elements of that painting and to see what, whether it's colors, forms, materials, what they could bring through to the next artist to keep that thread going in the game of telephone.
Add to the conversation. We're going to take a look at some of the other images when we return.
My name is Dale Clifton from the Discover Sea Shipwreck Museum. We have lots of history here, but there's always something new on the 302.
Welcome back. We are checking out Circle of Truth at the Biggs Museum in Dover. I'm joined by Laura Fravel. Now, Laura, we are in a room that is 12 through 23, and it starts with this really kind of, pastel, looks like you're looking through a water vase, and it kind of progresses into sharper edges and then to an envelope.
Yes, and I should say that every work in the show is numbered, so you can follow along and see what that artist was responding to, who responded to them. But there are some leaps, as you pointed out, and some artists, when they got something unfamiliar in their studio, went back to their comfort zone. That we start with, in this gallery, more abstract circular shapes, thinking about maybe the cosmos, globes. There are a lot of associations with spheres. Moving to something that looks almost like leaves, and that's something that artist was very known for, adding these brackets of color on either side to kind of break up the square form. So warm color in the upper right, cool color in the lower left. The artist who followed that, Ron Griffin, I will say, in his essay confessed that he knew who came before him, that he recognized those forms right away. They'd both shown in some group shows in LA together. And he thought he'd have fun with that he'd push it completely in the opposite direction. And there's a long tradition in the arts of trompe-l'oeil, or paintings that are meant to fool the eye. And there's a book called Citizen Spectator by Wendy Bellion, professor at the University of Delaware, looking at these paintings in the early Republic in the US, thinking about how your ability to figure out what is real, what is false, informs you as a citizen, that you need to be able to do that to participate in political life. And so Ron Griffin is playing with that tradition as well, that he let the white of the canvas show through in the envelope. He painted this matte black around it and tried to make it look as realistic as possible, painting the stripes on as a nod to the previous painting, but also to look like an envelope, that it's in transit, it's open, maybe somebody's receiving it. Inside, the envelope looks almost see-through, and that is supposed to be a photo of an earlier work he did, where he basically just Xeroxed a toilet seat cover, put this thing down. It looks like a collage, it looks cubist, and a lot of his work looks that way, even though it's actually built on very real forms. And then the one collaged element, just to be a little cheeky, is the stamp. He painted his own stamp and collaged that on top, so you have to look at this and go, wait, is that shadow painted? Is that light coming across the canvas? Is this 3D? Is this fake? And that's what you're encouraged to do with the show too, is you as the viewer participate in what is truthful about these. The show, I should say, is 49 works, ending with Ed Ruscha. It's 49 because you are the 50th one. You as spectator are the final arbiter of what is truthful.
Oh, absolutely. I thank you for sharing that with us. And it's a really cool kind of, element to add, because, a lot of people will look at these and they'll try to see the leap from one to another. Now, you mentioned how the artist who painted the envelope knew the artist who painted the leaves before him. But when you look at the essays, can you see where some of them were hand in hand, where the messages were getting through, or, in the writings?
I think so. Some people right away got what was underlying the work in front of them. Like in the gallery we're sitting, there's a painting, You Go Girl, that is fluorescent colors filled with a lot of joy. The artist responding to that knew right away who the artist was and got that joyful message and painted their own joy. It looks very different, but going back to a moment in their life when they were falling in love, when they were happy. And then there are artists who did not know each other, who clearly were on the same wavelength and understood that this structure was important, these colors were important, trying to come up with something that looks like a squiggly fabric of life, carrying some of those things across or carrying a grid across. There are other leaps, too, in the space we're sitting, and right behind us, what look very similar, sort of this blank table and the one next to it. Huge leap of one artist painted a shuttlecock. They wanted that bright red to refer to the painting before then. This was something they inherited from their grandparents. It was special to them. The next artist thought it was a salt shaker and then made this very textured surface with salt. So completely missed what this object was supposed to be, but visually very similar, striking, got that same geometric structure to it.
Maybe it's how two people can look at one thing and see two entirely different things.
Yes, and for artists who so much of their life is visual, they're used to communicating visually, it's a very different thing to think of your work in dialogue and to be in the same moment both an artist yourself but also a viewer, of trying to parse what this person in front of you meant and intended, and to realize how little your own viewers have been given to try to parse what you've been doing for years. So it's a very unsettling thing, too, to try to break down this kind of visual communication.
When you look at the paintings in this room, you mentioned the two that speak to joy. The one directly after that is like a lack of joy. It reminds me of something like Edgar Allan Poe, but then immediately preceding it, you have this, which I think is a really lovely surprise, the baby turtle.
Yes, the baby turtle's coming right after the crows. And the crows, this is an artist who saw the joyful painting before them and just thought, the world isn't like that. That's not truthful for me, that there has to be something kind of underlying it. And there are these birds who are very beautiful, that like light is caught in their feathers. They're very dark, velvety. But their role is basically carrion, that they take apart flesh, kind of get rid of garbage. So focused on that. And then the artist who responded to that with the baby turtle, I will say, from what I know, had the most trouble of anyone in the show.
Really?
That they saw the painting before them and just said, I can't do this, I don't want to participate, find somebody else.
So it almost ended right there.
It did.
Gosh,
Well,
drama.
He called up the curators and said, please pick somebody else. This is not for me. And they said, why don't you sit with it for a little bit and see what you can come up with? And the turtle is very sweet and to me is very tenderly held in these
Yeah.
hands. It's being kept, it's being protected. The artist who followed that thought that this was kind of a baby monster, that maybe the hands were going to crush this thing before it
no.
got started. So it's odd too,
Yeah.
in these things that to one person seem very obvious, what the next person
Yeah.
kind of takes from it.
Absolutely. Well, we are going to move into another room. There are 5 rooms.
5 rooms in our show,
Five
yes.
rooms in the show. We're going to move into another one. So we'll be right back.
Good afternoon, I'm Tim Gasparovic. I'm the fleet captain here on Paradise Tiki Boats. We're driving on the Christina River here today, and we really enjoy and having a great time out here with the folks from the 302 to enjoy the Christina River and the party atmosphere that we have out here.
Welcome back. We have moved deeper into the Circle of Truth at the Biggs Museum, and I'm joined by Laura Fravel to talk a little bit about what this message means as it goes down, a whisper down the alley or telephone. So we are in the 30s here, and before we came on, we were talking about the 3 paintings behind us that start with kind of like an abstract, but then move to something really unique in the show where we see like a cutout.
Yes, and there are a few artists in the show who got their 20 by 20 inch linen canvas and just thought, this is not enough. That either I have to add elements on top. We have one artist who took the canvas off and added basically chicken wire and a cage around it. Some people add sculpted elements. This is the only artist who carved into it and basically made a tiny sarcophagus for their hummingbird.
So what is the artist saying with the hummingbird and the flower, in the essay at least?
Well, this artist and the artist after it both mused on what are associations you have with hummingbirds, that this is a tiny bird, but it has a large migratory pattern, it covers a lot of ground, it has to constantly be in motion, it can fly backwards according to one of these artists, so it has that option to go kind of any which way, but here it's trapped. And in their essay, this artist talked a little bit about how they wanted to focus on this project and they were so excited for it, but there were so many things going on in their own life of they were taking care of their aging mother in her 90s, dishes were piling up in the sink, that there's all these other pressures to be constantly in motion to keep up with just for your day to day, that it's hard to focus and you kind of feel like you're stuck in this one place. So to take something that's constantly in motion and make it fixed in one place is a very arresting image. They also talked in their essay about their perception of the one before, because they took one look at the canvas before, put it away, started working on their own, and in their mind they only remembered the one red polka dot. That was all they remembered from the canvas before. And then later in the process went back and went, oh, wait a minute, this thing is covered with polka dots. Why did I think there was only one? And then ended up adding what is basically a night sky full of stars, all these dots glistening, that they just kind of gave this multitude of dots in a nod to their own failed perception.
You can really see where they're in concert, talking about the elements of truth and how life constricts it, and maybe for a time you can't move forward, you can't move backwards, and then you can. So you can kind of see how these two things play. But then we get to the one immediately afterwards, and it's a soothing image, like of someone's kitchen, or I'm not really sure
Yes,
where
that's something
that
that when I
is.
first saw, I thought was soothing as well.
Yeah.
That it looks like this series of doors. The artist writes about latch keys and having access to all these places and free entry between spaces. The artist responding to that saw it and went, this makes no sense, these planes don't line up, there's no way you can navigate this space. It's to them a very disquieting image, that they couldn't get away from how this didn't make sense to them. And so they made their own wooden structure that everything is clearly anchored to something else. You can see the entire structure from afar. And one thing that's interesting to me going through this show is I know that in the previous room, there's a work very similar to that as well, an abstract work. And that here, maybe 10, 15 works later in the show, we're getting those same forms and patterns again. That these artists had no connection to each other, they didn't look at each other's works, but there's all these echoes from earlier in that game of telephone.
And you see images beyond the abstract, you see images appear and then they're shared and they disappear. Like with the gun, there's a gun appears in one of them, and then it's used in the following one, but in a very different kind of way, in a humorous kind of way.
Yes, so the gun does have these very pastel colors on it. It's a nod to the one before. It takes the image of the one before and basically puts that same pattern all over the gun, so you get these glints of what came before. But the one after that, it looks almost like an art class, and it's poking fun at representation. That the gun's a canvas up on the wall. There's this cartoonish professor leading the lecture, a student who looks like she's not into this at all, that she thinks it's silly that we're talking about the image of a gun like it's a real gun. And kind of poking fun at the whole show as well, and how do you show truth in a 20-inch square canvas?
Yeah. One of the artists actually decided, like the artist who put the chicken wire on, to kind of cover the canvas with a shirt. Tell us about that.
Yes, that was number 48 in the series of 49, so right at the end. And that was very different in the show. The one before it plays with this mixture of fabric and metal. They covered the canvas in what looks like an 18th century fabric, cut out this map of the world with two guns at the bottom, laid that on top so you get this contrast between hard and soft. The artist who did the t-shirt is better known for these very atmospheric paintings, kind of abstract. This is something unlike she'd ever done before, but she was just at home, looking online, looking on social media, and was just obsessed in that moment of the idea that girls in the world did not have access to school, that they were meeting with violence just trying to get an education. And she thought, I've never done this kind of work before. I'm going to try to make something that responds to that. So it's a schoolgirl's uniform with language headlines printed across it. And then that is the one that was delivered to Ed Ruscha, probably the most famous artist in the series and the final artist. And I know Shane and Laura, the two curators of the show, just waited with bated breath to see what he would say from this. That's so unlike everything else in the series. It's an odd one to deliver to him right before the end of the game. But he came up with his own response, and it's quiet, it's subtle. He chose not to write an essay, so it's a little mysterious. But he's known for playing around with text, typography, sometimes letters that look like they're a little liquid or made from ribbons. So this is his response, is just ending with the word in. And it's in a circle, so it's kind of like the circle continues a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's up for interpretation. Absolutely.
It is. Yes. And like I said, you are the final arbiter as the
So what are we going
audience
to
of
do,
this show.
folks? So you have an event coming up before we wrap things up, coming up so people can learn more about some of these things.
Yes, we have the two curators of the show coming the first Wednesday in September. It's going to be a virtual lecture at museum so people can tune in from their homes anywhere. But a chance for them to share some of their favorite pairings in the show, stories about the making of this exhibition, and also for people in the audience to ask questions. Because I'm sure a lot of people have questions, and watching people come through the show, there are people who stop and read every label and then come down and buy the catalog as well, that they just want to know more and more about what these artists were thinking.
Yeah, I can see why. It really is fascinating. And this is up until the end of September?
September 22nd.
September 22nd. You heard it here. Well, thank you, Laura, so much for taking the time to share all of this with us. We certainly enjoy visiting.
Yes, well, thank you so much for coming out.
We'll be right back. Aren't these paintings amazing? If you visit the Biggs Museum, make sure you snap a picture and share it with us on Facebook. Now, here are some other things you might want to check out. For information on this or any of the exhibits at the Biggs Museum, you can visit biggsmuseum.org. That'll do it for this week's episode of The 302. Make sure you follow us on Facebook to get behind-the-scenes content you're just not going to get anywhere else. We're going to leave you now with a beauty shot at Silver Lake Park. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. Tell them you saw it on The 302.